The galaxy was not always a place of fear. There had been centuries of uneasy peace, trade agreements forged across light years, and fragile alliances between species that barely trusted one another. The Galactic Council claimed to represent order, unity, and progress. From their glittering spires on the core worlds, they spoke of balance and law. But beneath the speeches and the treaties, there were fractures-old grudges, unhealed scars from wars no one wanted to remember, and whispers that the age of peace was nothing more than an illusion. And then came the outpost, a single station on the edge of known space, a fortress built on a barren rock, a place no one thought would ever matter. Yet, history often begins in the places no one watches. It was there that an empire tested its strength, and it was there that humanity, underestimated as always, made a stand that would echo forever. They called it Outpost Jericho. Jericho was not a jewel of the galaxy. It was a supply hub, a checkpoint at the edge of trade routes. To most of the Council, it was just another insignificant colony. But to the humans stationed there, it was home. Soldiers, engineers, medics, and their families lived inside its reinforced walls, knowing that they were alone at the frontier, a thin line between civilization and the vast darkness. The first warnings came as static. Long-range sensors picked up distortions in space, ripples that suggested massive fleets moving through the void. The officers of Jericho sent their reports to the Council. The replies came slowly, filled with political hesitation, as if bureaucracy could stop what was coming. And then, one night, a sky lit up. An armada emerged from the void, thousands of warships, bristling with weapons, engines burning like miniature suns. Their banners were not those of the Council, but of the Draken Dominion, an empire of warlords that had been watching humanity with predatory patience. For years, they had dismissed humans as reckless, unrefined, a species too new to the stars to pose a threat. But humans had grown, expanded, and taken ground others considered untouchable. To the Draken, this was trespass. So they came to wipe them out. The first attack was merciless. Orbital bombardments pounded the outer defenses, turning steel into molten rivers. Communication towers shattered, cutting Jericho off from the rest of the galaxy. Families fled into bunkers, while soldiers scrambled to the walls. The ground shook, firestorms roared through the streets, and it seemed as if Jericho would fall in a single night. But it did not, because the humans refused to surrender. Commander Eric Danner stood on the walls as the bombardment raged. His uniform was torn, his face scarred by shrapnel, but his voice carried across the fortress with iron conviction. "They think we are weak," he shouted to his soldiers, "but they do not understand. This outpost is more than steel and stone. It is our home, and if they want it, they will pay for it in blood." The soldiers answered with a roar, not of fear, but of defiance. That roar marked the beginning of the siege. Days turned into weeks. The Draken encircled the fortress, unleashing endless waves of infantry and machines. Their war beasts, towering constructs of flesh and metal, stormed the walls. Their artillery shook the ground with every volley. Yet Jericho held. The humans fought from the shadows, turning alleys into kill zones, using every broken piece of rubble as cover. What the Draken did not understand was that humans thrived in desperation. Where other species would have surrendered to hopelessness, humans became sharper, fiercer. The more they were cornered, the harder they fought. And the galaxy was watching. Smuggled transmissions slipped past the blockade, carrying fragments of the battle to distant worlds. Grainy images of human soldiers fighting with knives when their rifles ran dry. Footage of civilians carrying ammunition to the walls, refusing to abandon the fight. Stories of medics who worked until their hands bled, keeping men alive on scraps of rations and drops of medicine. These stories spread faster than the Draken could contain them. And as they spread, something stirred in the hearts of species long silenced by fear. The Council, meanwhile, debated. From their towers of glass and marble, They argued over whether Jericho was worth saving, whether humanity had brought this on themselves, whether intervention would risk open war. While they hesitated, Jericho bled. But Jericho did not bow. And then came the night that would burn itself into legend. The Draken launched their greatest assault yet, a storm meant to break the defenders once and for all. Thousands of warships rained fire upon the fortress. Siege towers bristling with weapons crawled toward the walls. The ground quaked beneath the march of their armies. It was a force no outpost could withstand. But Jericho was not just an outpost anymore. It was a symbol. Commander Danner stood before his soldiers, his voice carrying through the storm. They believe this is the night we fall. They believe this is the night we break. But they are wrong. This will be the night they learn who we are. We are human. We do not surrender. We do not break. And when the galaxy remembers Jericho, they will remember that. The defenders roared, raising their weapons, ready to face the impossible. And thus began the siege that changed the galaxy forever. The siege did not relent. Every sunrise over Jericho was met not with peace, but with fire. The Draken Dominion encircled the outposts with precision, choking off every supply line, every hope of reinforcement. Warships hung in orbit like vultures, their shadows drifting across the battered walls. Siege engines hurled molten plasma into the fortress day and night, their thunder a constant reminder that the enemy would never rest. And yet, neither did the humans inside Jericho. The world had shrunk to survival. The once bustling marketplace had become a barricade of overturned transports and sandbags. The medical bay overflowed, every cot filled, the floors stained with blood that could not be washed away. Children huddled in bunkers deep beneath the fortress, listening to the earth tremble above them. The air was thick with the stench of smoke, sweat, and defiance. Commander Eric Danner refused to leave the walls. He walked them daily, boots crunching over shattered stone, speaking to every soldier he passed. His presence was a promise. You are not alone. You will not be forgotten. Double quote, sir. Our rations will not last another week, one officer whispered. Danner's gaze never wavered. Then we make a week last a month. We stretch every drop, every crumb. The Draken believe they can starve us out. They have never seen what humans become when hunger claws at us. And indeed, the humans adapted. Engineers tore down what remained of the civilian power grid and rebuilt it into makeshift turrets. Mechanics salvaged weapons from enemy wreckage, repurposing alien tech into crude but deadly tools. Hunters crept beyond the walls at night, slipping through the Draken lines like shadows, bringing back food and ammunition stolen from the enemy. But what truly terrified the Draken was not the ingenuity, it was the resilience. Every time they breached the walls, they found humans waiting, bloodied, exhausted, barely clinging to life, and still fighting. Soldiers with broken arms strapped their rifles to their shoulders and fired one-handed. Civilians wielded kitchen knives against armored beasts. Medics patched wounds in the middle of firefights, dragging the fallen back into the fight. The Draken commander, a warlord named Korthos, could not understand it. He had fought dozens of species, crushed rebellions with overwhelming force, reduced civilizations to ashes. And yet here, on this insignificant rock, the humans refused to bow. They are cornered animals, he snarled to his officers, his jagged teeth bared. They will break. All creatures break. But day after day, Jericho stood by the third month of the siege. The outpost no longer resembled the place it once was. The walls were scorched black, jagged with craters where plasma rounds had struck. Towers leaned precariously, patched together with steel and determination. Yet somehow, the humans had not fallen. Inside, the cost was brutal. Half the garrison was dead or wounded. Food was scarce, water rationed to drops per day. Disease began to spread in the cramped bunkers. And still, they refused surrender. What the Draken did not see was the fire that burned in the hearts of the defenders. They had begun carving names into the walls, every fallen soldier, every civilian lost etched into the stone so none would be forgotten. Children whispered those names, like prayers before they slept, vowing silently to survive so the list would not grow longer. The siege was no longer just about survival. It was about memory, about refusing to let those sacrifices mean nothing. The turning point came one night when the Draken unleashed their greatest weapon, yet it was called the Titan Beast, a construct of flesh and machine. Taller than the fortress walls, its body fused with cannons and armor plating. It thundered forward, its massive fists shattering barricades, its cannons tearing through defenses. The ground shook with every step as panic rippled through the defenders. Commander Danner stood at the breach, staring up at the monstrosity. His soldiers looked to him, waiting for orders. He knew that if the beast broke through, Jericho would fall. "Focus fire," he roared. Every weapon turned upon the Titan beast. Explosions ripped across its armored hide, but it did not stop. It bellowed, a sound that rattled the bones, and slammed into the wall with earth-shattering force. For a moment, it seemed as if Jericho would collapse, but then a voice rose, a young engineer, her face smeared with soot and blood. She had studied the alien machines for weeks, scavenging pieces from the battlefield. And now she had her chance. Hit the joints. She screamed. The armor is strongest on the chest and back aim for the legs. The soldiers obeyed. Rockets streaked through the night, slamming into the Titan's knees. Metal shrieked, hydraulics burst, and the beast staggered. It tried to rise, but another volley tore through its supports. With a final deafening crash, the Titan collapsed, its massive body shaking the ground. The defenders erupted into cheers. For the first time in months, they had not just survived, they had struck back. Across the galaxy, hidden transmissions carried word of the victory. Entire worlds watched the footage in disbelief. Humans standing atop the broken carcass of a monster that should have been unstoppable. To many, it was just one battle in one siege. But to those who had lived in fear of the Dominion, it was proof. Proof that the impossible could be done. And to the Draken, it was humiliation. Warlord Korthas slammed his claws into the strategy table, sparks flying. "They are vermin," he snarled. "Nothing more. If the galaxy begins to believe they can resist us, our empire will crumble. Burn them out. Burn the entire outpost to ash." His fleet unleashed a new wave of destruction. Entire districts of Jericho were leveled, firestorms consuming everything in their path. Civilians screamed as bunkers collapsed. The skies glowed red with the fury of bombardment, yet when the smoke cleared, when the fires died down, the humans were still there, scarred, broken, but alive, and waiting for the next assault. The siege was no longer about one fortress. It was no longer about one empire and one species. The galaxy was watching in the slums of conquered worlds. Whispers spread, "If humans can hold, so can we." On mining colonies stripped bare by the Dominion, workers clenched their fists. "If Jericho still fights, so will we." In the halls of the Galactic Council, politicians shifted uncomfortably as reports poured in. The humans endure. The humans will not fall. The Draken had meant to make an example of Jericho. Instead, they had created a legend. And the longer the siege dragged on, the clearer it became. Whether Jericho fell tomorrow or a year from now, the galaxy had already changed, because the humans had shown everyone that an empire of fear could be defied. The siege had become something more than a battle. It was a crucible. A place where hope was forged out of despair, and where every breath was stolen from the jaws of death. 3 months had turned to 4. Supplies had dwindled to almost nothing. The medical bay had transformed into a graveyard, with more bodies being carried out than healed. The fortress walls were scarred with countless impacts, entire sections leaning like ruins from another age. Yet still, the humans stood. But even legends have limits. Commander Eric Danner knew it. He had not slept more than a few hours in weeks, his face gaunt, eyes sunken, voice ragged. His officers argued in hushed tones about retreat, about surrender, about anything that would stop the bleeding. But Danner silenced them with one phrase. If Jericho falls, the galaxy falls with it. The Draken Dominion escalated their tactics. If brute force could not win, then treachery would. One night, as the fortress burned under another wave of bombardment, a group of humans approached the gates. They were gaunt, weary, faces hollow with hunger. Refugees, they claimed, survivors from the outlying villages destroyed by the Dominion. The guards hesitated. Humanity was fractured, tired, desperate. Who could turn away fellow survivors? But as the gates opened, the truth revealed itself. Explosives, hidden beneath cloaks, detonated at the threshold. The blast tore through the entrance, hurling defenders into the air. The Draken surged forward, pouring through the breach like a tide of claws and fire. Screams echoed through the night as the walls shook, and for the first time, it seemed Jericho would fall. Yet even betrayal could not end them. Civilians untrained, terrified, took up arms. Children who had grown up in the siege hurled rocks and bottles filled with fire. Medics wielded scalpels as weapons. The defenders fought with madness in their eyes, unwilling to surrender their home, their people, their memory. And somehow, impossibly, they pushed the Draken back. The breach was sealed with blood and rubble. The invaders repelled at unimaginable cost. But trust inside the fortress cracked that day. Whispers spread. Who could be trusted? Could any stranger be allowed within the walls? Even among themselves, paranoia grew. The siege was not only killing them, it was poisoning them from within. Meanwhile, far beyond Jericho, the galaxy stirred. The story of the siege spread like wildfire. Smugglers carried tailies through back channels. Resistance cells broadcast coded messages. Refugees whispered hope where once there had been none. On distant worlds, oppressed species began to rise. Small revolts sparked in the shadows, embers lit by the defiance of Jericho. And in the halls of the Galactic Council, fear grew. The Council had always feared humanity, long before Jericho. They were unpredictable, stubborn, unyielding in ways no other species was. Now, with the siege dragging into legend, the Council debated behind closed doors. If they endure this, one counselor whispered, they will inspire revolutions across every Dominion-controlled world. They already have, another answered grimly. Yet the Council did nothing. They would not risk open war with the Dominion. They would let Jericho bleed alone, watching from their golden thrones as humanity burned. But individuals among them, ambassadors, soldiers, even smugglers, began to take risks. Supplies smuggled in secret, weapons slipped through blockades, information traded in whispers. Small gestures, but enough to matter. Jericho was not entirely alone anymore. Inside the fortress, Commander Danner gathered his remaining officers. The room was lit only by flickering lanterns, the power grid failing more each day. The air was thick with the scent of burned rations and sweat. We cannot hold forever, one officer said bitterly. We do not need to hold forever, Danner replied. We need to hold long enough. Long enough for what? Danner's eyes hardened. For the galaxy to wake up. For them to see that the Dominion is not invincible. That we can lead them. That if one fortress can stand, so can 1,000 worlds. A silence fell across the room. It was madness. Hope balanced on the edge of starvation. But in madness, there was truth. The Draken, enraged by failure, unleashed their most desperate tactic yet: orbital firestorms. Warships lined up above Jericho, unleashing torrents of plasma designed to scour the very earth. Forests turned to ash, rivers boiled. The land itself blackened under their fury, but the humans had prepared. Bunkers carved deep. Beneath the fortress shielded civilians. Engineers reinforced with scavenged alien alloys. And soldiers fought in tunnels beneath the scorched earth. When the firestorm ended, the Draken expected silence. Instead, from beneath the smoke, guns roared once more. They refused to die, snarled Warlord Korthas, watching the footage from orbit. His claws dug into the table, carving deep scars into the steel. Then we will bury them alive. But even Korthas, for all his fury, began to feel unease. His armies had thrown everything at Jericho, and still the humans stood. And worse, his soldiers whispered of them. They called the humans demons, monsters, spirits of vengeance who rose again and again, no matter how many times they were cut down. Morale in the Dominion ranks began to fracture. Fear seeped in. The siege was no longer a demonstration of power. It was a test of endurance. And the humans were winning. The breaking point came in the 5th month. The Draken launched their largest assault yet. Entire legions poured against the walls, supported by war machines, by airstrikes, by everything they could bring. The ground shook as if the world itself was breaking. Inside, the defenders prepared for the end. Ammunition was nearly gone, food reduced to scraps, medics without supplies. Commander Danner stood on the wall, rifle in hand, his voice carrying above the chaos. This is it. They believe this will break us. Show them the truth. The battle raged for hours. The walls buckled. Entire sections collapsed. Soldiers fought hand to hand, blades against claws, fists against armor. Blood painted the stones, screams filled the air, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, Jericho still stood. Barely. The walls were rubble. The fortress was a ruin. But the humans were alive, weapons in hand, eyes burning with fire. And the Draken retreated for the first time. They pulled back. Not in victory, but in fear. Across the galaxy, the impossible had happened. Jericho had endured the greatest siege in living memory. The Dominion had thrown everything at them: machines, beasts, treachery, firestorms, and still failed. The fortress had not fallen. The story spread faster than ever. On enslaved worlds, uprisings ignited. Unconquered colonies, rebellions flared. Even within the Dominion itself, whispers of doubt spread among their soldiers. Jericho had become more than a fortress. It had become a symbol, and symbols are harder to kill than armies. But the humans knew the truth. They had not won a war. They had not defeated the Dominion. They had simply survived, and survival was enough because survival meant hope. And hope, once lit, could burn across the galaxy brighter than any firestorm. The morning after the Dominion retreat was unlike any dawn Jericho had seen in months. The sky was still blackened with soot, the air thick with ash. The fortress walls were broken, reduced to jagged bones of stone and metal. Fires smoldered in craters. The stench of blood and charred earth clung to every breath. And yet, for the first time in half a year, silence reigned. No war horns, no bombardments, no endless swarms of alien soldiers clawing at the gates. Just silence. The defenders stumbled through the ruins, dazed and hollow-eyed. Many were too exhausted to cheer, too wounded to raise their fists. They were alive, yes, but at what cost? Families torn apart, friends buried beneath rubble, children who had grown old in the span of weeks, faces hardened by horrors no one should have endured. And yet, as the sun finally broke through the smoke, its rays cutting across the shattered fortress, something extraordinary happened. One by one, the survivors stood taller. Broken, starving, bloodied, but unbowed. Jericho still stood. A message that shook the stars. It was not long before the galaxy heard the news at first. The reports were dismissed. No one believed that Jericho could have endured. Entire Dominion legions had been dispatched. Orbital firestorms had burned the land. Treachery had torn the walls. Surely, the fortress had fallen long ago. But when smuggler transmissions leaked footage of survivors standing atop the ruined walls, rifles raised in defiance, the galaxy could no longer deny it. Jericho had survived the impossible. On Dominion-occupied worlds, whispers turned to roars. Slaves rose against their masters, screaming the name of Jericho as they charged. On frontier colonies, oppressed miners and farmers took up arms, believing that if a single fortress could resist the Dominion, so could they. Even within the Dominion's own armies, doubt festered. Soldiers who had once marched with certainty now wondered if their warlords were truly invincible. Some deserted. Others refused to fight, and across the fractured galaxy, something humanity had not seen in centuries began to stir. Hope. The Council's fearing, the marble halls of the Galactic Council. Panic rippled. The Council had thought the siege would be the end of humanity, a warning to other species never to defy the Dominion. Instead, Jericho had become the spark of a revolution. "Do you not see?" shouted one counselor, pounding his fist against the table. "They are no longer fighting for survival. They are fighting for legend. The humans are not just resisting, they are becoming a symbol." Another replied coldly, "Symbols are dangerous. They are harder to kill than armies." The council debated for days, torn between action and hesitation. Officially, they remained neutral, unwilling to risk war. But quietly, factions within the council began funneling resources to resistance groups. Old alliances stirred. Ancient rivalries reignited. The galaxy was shifting. And everyone knew it. The Dominion's shame, meanwhile. In the war halls of the Draken Dominion, rage boiled like a storm. Warlord Korthas, who had promised Jericho's swift destruction, now faced humiliation on an interstellar scale. His warriors whispered of human demons, of fortress ghosts who refused to die. His rivals mocked him behind closed doors. His authority crumbled, and in the Dominion, weakness was death. But Korthas refused to yield. "They think Jericho was a victory," he snarled to his generals. "Let them believe it. We will grind them down, not with one battle, but with fire, famine, and the slow death of inevitability." Yet deep inside, even he feared the truth. The humans had done more than survive. They had planted a seed of rebellion that no army could erase. A price of survival back in Jericho. Survival was not triumph. It was burden. The fortress was in ruins. The people were starving. Disease spread through the crowded shelters. Every survivor carried scars, some carved into flesh, others carved into memory. Commander Eric Danner stood atop the wall one night, staring into the stars. His body ached with wounds that refused to heal, his mind heavy with the names of the fallen. He had led them through hell, but he wondered if he had only led them to a slower death. A medic approached quietly. "Sir, the people look to you." Danner's voice was low. "I am no hero. I am just stubborn." The medic smiled faintly. "Sometimes that is all we have." And that was the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been strength, technology, or numbers. It was stubbornness. The refusal to quit, even when logic demanded surrender. The refusal to break, even when the universe itself seemed to demand it. Jericho was proof of that. The legacy of Jericho in the years that followed. The siege of Jericho became a story told in every corner of the galaxy. Songs were written of the defenders who held the walls. Statues were carved of the medics who fought with scalpels, the children who threw fire, the civilians who became warriors. Entire resistance movements painted Jericho's crest on their banners. And when rebellion spread, when Dominion outposts began to fall, every soldier whispered the same truth before battle. If Jericho could stand, so can we. The fortress itself was rebuilt, stone by stone, scar by scar. Not as a military base, but as a monument. Pilgrims came from across the stars to stand on its walls, to touch the cracked stones, to feel the echo of defiance in their bones. Jericho was no longer just a fortress. It was the heart of a movement, the symbol of a galaxy, awakening. Closing narration. And so, the siege that was meant to crush humanity became the story that changed the galaxy forever. The Dominion wanted Jericho to be an example of fear. Instead, it became an example of hope. They wanted humanity broken. Instead, they proved unbreakable. They wanted silence. Instead, they sparked a roar that echoed across the stars. This was the lesson of Jericho. That sometimes survival itself is victory. That sometimes standing when all the universe expects you to fall is enough to change everything. And as the galaxy burned with rebellion, one truth spread from world to world, whispered in fear by enemies and shouted in defiance by allies. Humans do not surrender. Not now, not ever.